It is night by the time you reach town. The rain still pours, as it has done so for the last several hours, overfilling the troughs and gutters in the stables on the outside edge of town. You've never been to Glendale before, so you duck under a tree to take a momentary respite from the rain and get your wits about you. It must have been coming down here for the better part of the day, as the roads and pathways are muddy, and almost no one seems to be outside. A man sits on his porch a few houses down, a soft glow from his pipe faintly illuminating his face. About 30 feet away you spot a sign attached to a building. A hanging lantern illuminates it with a soft amber light. It reads, "The Polite Pirate Tavern and Inn." You hop quickly across the muddied street, trying to avoid splashing your feet in the puddles. You reach the door of the Polite Pirate and press your hand on the rough wooden door. As you open the door, the raucous sounds of life spill out and overpower the sound of the rain. Men, women, and children alike sit at the tables sharing meals with one another and enjoying each other's company. Behind the front counter stands a muscled half-orc. He wears a normal everyman's tunic with a brown apron over it, his hands busily drawing a freshly cleaned mug. His one good eye looks up and meets your gaze. "Good evening. Welcome to the Polite Pirate. You needing a room, or are you just here for a bite to eat?"
Hello everyone, my name is Joel Bacon and I'm happy to introduce you all to the world of a Dungeon Master. A Dungeon Master is a person who runs or administers a tabletop role-playing game, and the term is usually used with Dungeons & Dragons, by far the most well-known of these games. A tabletop role-playing game is usually played by several people, one of which is the Dungeon Master and the others are the players. Players portray or act out the role of a character, and the Dungeon Masters present and facilitate the world that the players interact with. In most role-playing games, the DM and players alike roll dice to determine the success of their actions.
At the beginning of this video, I described a scene that I might use in a typical fantasy setting, much like Dungeons & Dragons. In these games, the term Dungeon Master might be something different. It might be Game Master or Storyteller, and that depends upon the different kind of system or setting that you're using. But ultimately, the terms are relatively interchangeable.
Role-playing games can be different in several ways. The most recognizable distinction is theme. Dungeons & Dragons is a fantasy-themed roleplay featuring dragons, elves, and wizards. Legend of the Five Rings is set in a setting very similar to feudal Japan, placing importance on the samurai and family honor. Shadowrun is a dystopian cyberpunk setting where players are thieves for hire trying to stick it to the megacorporations that run the world. And World of Darkness is a game of modern horror set in an alternate version of our own world where monsters prey on the lives of normal mortals. Now, each of these different settings feature their own unique set of rules, what we call a system. This system governs how characters are made, how fighting happens, and in general, how the players can interact with the world. In addition, each game is organized a bit differently. They all come in books, as you saw. Games such as Shadowrun and World of Darkness both feature a core rulebook, which has all that you need to play the game, both for the Dungeon Master and the players. Dungeons & Dragons, despite being the most popular one, is structured a little bit differently. For Dungeons & Dragons, the players each need to know, or at least have read, the player's handbook. And then the Dungeon Master will usually need at least the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual. The Monster Manual provides the various different types of monsters that the players might encounter, whereas the Dungeon Master's Guide has information on creating dungeons and, in general, running the game. In most other games, though, those types of things are condensed together in the core rulebook. After that, things can get even more interesting. Books such as Xanathar's Guide to Everything add to Dungeons & Dragons new magical items and spells for players, and new tricks for Dungeon Masters to employ. whereas books like Princes of the Apocalypse have a whole adventure all ready to go. This is a very attractive option for early and beginner dungeon masters because it has everything that you need right here. You don't need to create a plot line or a setting or anything. It's all packaged right here for the players to explore and to conquer and defeat the villain. Then there are other kinds of books, such as this book for Shadowrun, which completely changes the setting from being where the world is ruled by megacorporations to where the world is secretly ruled by evil fairies. And then in World of Darkness, there are books such as Vampire and Mage. There are also books such as Werewolf and Changeling, but I do not have physical copies of those with me. Vampire changes the theme of the book from modern horror to a game of personal horror and political horror, because the vampires are a very political group of people and the players have to struggle with their own humanity. Whereas Mage is a game where power can corrupt you, and so the players have to learn to balance the use of their power and not go insane or maddened by the corrupting elements of magic. Ultimately, I want to say that I believe that role-playing is the most fun you can have with your brain. I've had so many good experiences role-playing. By meeting with other people and working together and playing these games, I have been able to be a part of many fantastic stories, many of which have been both joyous and heartbreaking at times. As either a player or a dungeon master, you get to be part of a uniquely creative social experience, regardless of what setting or system you use. I've even done this with children, using a wonderful system called No Thank You Evil. If you ever have the opportunity, I encourage each and every one of you to experience a tabletop roleplay at some point in your life. Thank you.